What is crack-a-lackin' all of my painting homies? I don't want to be sitting here recording this right now because I've somehow managed to get sick again. So I'm going to try and do this in one take as cleanly as I can. Probably won't nail it. Definitely won't nail it. But anyway, over the last week or two, I've been painting up my Leviathan Tyranids. Now, I've already created a couple of videos on making the scheme itself, doing the glow, and testing out some models. But I wanted an excuse to paint the entire army in one quick go. So I've been working on it over the last week or two, kind of when I've had spare time after work and in between some other projects. And the whole plan for this army was to give it away to someone on Patreon. So of course, if you want to support the channel and you want a chance to have these guys given to you, go check out my Patreon. The link's in the description. Alright, now normally I would not prime these with a rattle can, but in the sake of saving time and not wanting to make my desk dirty and not overheating my compressor, so I can just go ahead and spray the rest of the red tonight and try to get a bulk of the spraying done, I'm going to take the lazy approach and just rattle can these guys for now. Now, this is going to be a little bit different to some of my previous videos purely because I've already made a complete tutorial on how I created this scheme, kind of just following along as I winged it and put some colors together. But I just wanted to show the process and kind of how I went about tackling the entire army and how long it took and whatnot as I broke up the entire force across, a few nights here at work. So the scheme itself was built to be able to kind of block out into a few different easy steps. So for example, I went and airbrushed the entire army in my base red, which I think was Games Workshop's Corn Red, and then a Zenithal coat, which was a much quicker step with Evil Sun Scarlet, all in the same session. By the time I was kind of done with the last model, the first model had dried again, so I was able to mix up some contrast paint and slap that all over the models. And again, once I was through the entire army, I was able to start tackling the next step. Now that all of the kind of slower working process steps as well as slower to dry steps are done, I move into just some quick stuff, and that's dry brushing. You could call it dry brushing, you could call it overbrushing. I'm essentially using a makeup brush which has lots of very soft bristles, so it's not kind of as abrasive as most dry brushes, and the paint brushes themselves do have a fair amount of paint on them, so it's kind of soft feathering over all of the raised edges as opposed to a traditional dry brush. After this, I just do some kind of spots with an orange just to add a little bit of a brighter highlight, and then I fill in all of the, I don't know what you'd call them, the little veins, little recess bits with contrast paints. I then went about the worst step of this entire army. Now this would have been a different night for sure, and that is painting the base coat of all of the armored carapace. Now, I was using a mixture of black and scale 75's petroleum grey for the base color. Truth be told, I think doing just this step alone took me a couple of nights purely because it was just so tedious and frustrating. I didn't get a clean coat over the entire force in one coat. So it was just pure suffering. But after this, we can go into more fun steps. So again, I'm just going with a smaller brush this time, but still a makeup brush, and essentially overbrushing. So I'm using scale 75's khaki and kind of attacking most of the armored parts of the miniatures. Then after this, all I do is I slowly add more and more white to the model, to the paint, and just dry brush, overbrush a smaller portion of the armor. I like this shot in particular. It was a little bit amusing. I kind of posted this on TikTok and some people were arguing in the comments about whether I know how to dry brush or not, and then some people coming in and saying it's a different technique and whatnot. But it shows the technique that I actually want. So you can see, especially on his back, where it's kind of soft feathered. It's almost created like a natural texture to the carapace as opposed to just hard lines and picking out edges, which is exactly what I wanted from this technique, and it's why I love using makeup brushes. I'll generally pick up a whole bunch of cheap ones all at a time, and I burn through them. I think this project I probably threw out 5-6 brushes. Now, because it is a messy process, dry brushing, over brushing is always going to create a little bit of mess unless, I don't know, unless you're a person that can avoid that. I just go over and just with Evil Sun Scarlet, just cover up some of the mistakes. I then make a mixture of the magenta contrast paint, I forget the name, some flesh, I think it's Cadian flesh tone, and white, and then pick out the raised parts of all of the inner veins, as well as things like tongues, the inside portions of the talons on the leapers, and all that kind of stuff. Then with an airbrush, I just feather out from the edges with some Cadian flesh tone on the gribbly mouths and tentacles of whichever models I think need some interest there. I then make another contrast mixture. So this is just the magenta again. I think it's Doomfire magenta and contrast medium. Now don't follow, this is a 50-50 that I'm showing and painting here. I didn't actually record the next one because this was way too saturated. I ended up probably adding the same amount of contrast paint and then just whatever was on the brush and mixing that in. So it's probably like 1 to 10 and redoing it purely because it created a much nicer effect. I don't think I recorded the next step, but I basically took the color on the tongues and stippled that over all of the leaper's tentacles, as you can see there, as well as picking out the teeth in just the same mixture of khaki and white. I then fill in all of the eye socket areas. As you can see on this guy, they're all kind of nicely sculpted in. I'm just using some white ink and then some Vallejo Game Color Fluoro Magenta over the top of that. Once that's done, I pick out just the raised portion of the eyes with some straight white, and I can call the eyes done there. Now, I didn't record the first step, but I just kind of added a little airbrush halo. I think I was doing a different project and I already had some in the airbrush, so I did it at the same time using white ink. But white ink again with a brush, I'm filling in just kind of the portions that I want to glow. Now for the big, Psychophage, I think that's the name. I wanted his whole booty to glow, so I essentially picked out the raised portions again with an airbrush with just white ink, and now I'm covering that entire area with Vallejo Game Color Fluoro Purple. And this is kind of the undertone for the brighter areas. I go back and forth through a few steps, just adding different values of light here and there to create a nice transition, as well as, you'll see later, I use some different colors to make it interesting. Now I decided to use an oil wash here because it was quick and it just kind of seeped into all the little recesses naturally. This is mixing some Abtilone 502 Snow White oils and then their quick dry thinner. And then with the quick dry thinner on a makeup sponge, I go and just kind of clean up the edges because it's not gloss varnished, so it does kind of bleed into the paint a little bit. I then reintroduce a small halo of white glow with an airbrush again. And then over those bright white areas, I go ahead and use Vallejo Fluoro Magenta, the same as the eyes, and with multiple thin layers, just slowly building up the opacity of the color, I create this nice purple to magenta pink glow. Then again, just to add another value of light, I go over just a smaller portion of the model with some white oils again. And then again, with that same magenta through an airbrush, I just do a couple of very thin passes just to tint it, but to keep it close to white and still very, very bright. I then go ahead and go the opposite way, using once again a makeup brush and just some straight purple paint. I forget which one it was. And I pick out some of the higher portions kind of away from the inside light, just to create some more contrast. Then using some charred brown, I'm just painting all of the bases. And then I do a very quick dry brush with khaki. And then using AK Interactive's Diorama Snow, I cover most of the bases there. Now, I played around with this on a leaper, but I wanted to test a different way. So I've been using Yoo-Hoo glue. I finally found it. And I've been using different mixtures and different ways of applying it. I first mixed some contrast paint in and found that I only had 10 seconds of working time, so it was kind of a pain, but it did look good. So here I'm using some Tamiya red ink, and the working time has increased dramatically, but I'm not a fan of the color, to be honest. So I'll have to keep kind of experimenting with that. Now, I went back to a technique that I haven't used for a fair while. I used to use it to kind of create like stars and stuff for nebula effects. But I put some red contrast paint onto a toothbrush and just started flicking it all over the model for some blood spray. It's really quick, really easy, and pretty effective. So as you can see, this took me, I would say, about 2 weeks. I can't actually remember the exact amount of nights that I spent on this after work. And of course, I did do the big brain tyrant and one of the leapers beforehand as a test. But this was a very quick and easy and effective scheme to paint. It was very enjoyable, and now I can look at this entire Tyranid force, and you know, it's the first Tyranid army I think I've ever painted. So it's cool to have them in front of me and, you know, be able to say that I finally painted a force of these and they're all the nice new models. But again, if you would like to win these guys, I'm giving them away to a Patreon just to say thank you for the increased support that I've had ever since, you know, starting to make videos again. So if you want a chance to win those, make sure you go check out the Patreon. It's at the top of the description. Make sure you like and subscribe the video. It's always appreciated, and I will see you guys in the next one.